Okay, so next thing. I had brain damage when I was making this section. All right, so the next thing that he talks about that I do think applies in particular to VTubing is how selective outrage is a very common feature of this space, and how Twitter in particular is a shit platform with a shit way of operating and creates shit behavior. Now, the selective outrage thing in particular is an issue that is very prevalent in VTubing because, especially among small indies and or pre-debut VTweeters, there is a very common tendency to use selective outrage as a publicity strategy. Now, those of you who tuned into my last stream, if you haven't, I highly recommend you watch I've timestamped important bits, so I highly recommend you watch at least some parts of it. But people who've watched my last stream, I mentioned the topic of moral panics, right? The idea that moral panics can be co-opted by individuals on the internet as publicity strategies. Basically, what happens is you take something that is fairly innocuous, you make it out to be a large societal problem that you are an advocate for fixing, and you use that as a reason to funnel outrage towards a creator and elevate yourself in the process. This is a very common part of small indie VTubers on Twitter. Specifically, probably not fair to say small indie VTubers. The small indie VTubers whose primary method of gaining attention is Twitter. And again, this kind of behavior where you weaponize topics and issues by blowing them out of proportion and attacking other people to make yourself look better, no one is going to argue that this is a bad thing. And I do think that this is something in particular that affects the VTubing industry. But the other part of this is that this is... JV Robrigado. Selective outrage seems to presuppose that the VTuber community is a unified front. Yes, that is a good point as well. So again, selective outrage, the way that I interpreted it was that individuals within the industry were being selective about what they got angry about. But with you bringing up that point, that is, again, very valid because, at least the way it was used in the video, very much made it seem like the VTubing industry as a whole, as a quote-unquote community, was picking and choosing which things to get angry over, when in actuality that was not the case at all. The VTubing industry is not at all unified enough to do that, except maybe where the matter is about privacy, for obvious reasons. Okay, so selective outrage and Twitter being a shit platform. So the other thing that I want to talk about is that his video actually does bring up a pretty decent point, although it doesn't really put it into words. Okay, now that I think about it, maybe I'm making this point for him. But Twitter, in particular, is not a platform that is conducive to discussions, to meaningful debate or exchange of ideas, whatever. And that is because the way that Twitter is built as a platform is that you are supposed to be able to see what everyone else posts, and you're supposed to be able to join in on any conversation. Now, as a result of that, Twitter as a platform is designed to take your personal/private thoughts, opinions, discussions, conversations, and turn those into public melees. And this is not an environment where you can achieve that kind of this is an environment that encourages that kind of shit flinging for the sake of publicity. So again, he does raise two good points in the idea that being selectively outraged about, various issues or whatever is harmful to the industry, to your growth as a creator, etc. But also that the platform itself is built in a horrible way and is built in a way that encourages horrible interactions. Every time I read this tweet about Scarlet, it's... ugh. Alright, so the next thing that I want to talk about is the way that Shizzy it's kind of ironic how he points out that Twitter is a shit platform and people use it in a shit way, and then proceeds to do the exact same thing in the way that he's structured and, made his video. So, a significant point that he brings up is the issue of representation and racism in the VTubing industry. Now, bear in mind that one, he's used the medium of a call-out post. I cannot get this across enough. The medium is the message, which means the way you say something will become a part of the meaning that people take away from what you say. So already, it's very combative. It's very accusatory. He's used a call-out post. But the second thing is that not only does he promote that call-out through Twitter, but he leans into the things that makes Twitter a horrible platform for tackling complex issues and having constructive discussions. And the issue that he uses to, funnel into this is the issue of there being insufficient representation of black people within the VTubing space, either black creators or creators that use a black model. And the problem that I have with this is that he automatically ties it to the issue of he automatically assumes that this lack of representation must be because of racism, and that is the only reason he provides. Now, this is a quote from the video. "I wish more of y'all would embrace your actual culture, because why the fuck you all get VTuber models and all of a sudden y'all are Japanese?" First off, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of not viewing all of VTubing through the lens of, American cultural values. And what I mean by that is every culture is going to have its unique priority of certain virtues and values. For America, diversity is a very highly prioritized value. Understandably so. You guys have hundreds of years. I feel like I lost IQ listening to that. Yeah. You guys have hundreds of years to make that the case. However, it also needs to be pointed out that other countries might not share that exact same priority list. So while diversity may be a big issue for America, American culture, and Americans, that doesn't mean that this is an issue that's going to span other cultures. And especially when you're looking at ironically, how diverse the VTubing as an industry is in terms of the number of cultures and countries that it spans, to assume that all of them need to share your concern with diversity can be a little presumptuous when you end up condemning them on the basis of that. The second thing is, look, VTubing, links to anime, etc., etc. Let's not pretend that there is no reason why someone who is black might choose to use, a lighter-skinned, typically anime-styled model that isn't to do with racism. Now, I will get to the point that there is genuine racism in the VTubing community in a second, but first, I want to establish that the way that this quote is phrased makes it sound like no one would ever want to, use a kind of stock standard VTubing model if they choose to become a VTuber, which again is really presumptuous. And the oddest thing about that is that it sounds like he wants to call out people in particular for this. And when you do call outs, usually I would assume you'd like to be specific with the people that you're calling out, otherwise others might get caught in the crossfire. And oh yeah, Robert Stoll, more rep for variety, not to make a point. Exactly. And again, I will get to that more in a second. But yeah, he mentions near the end of the video that he is friends with Kenji, that he thinks Kenji is cool. And I mean, I don't think I need to talk about that more. So it is odd that he would make this point, phrase it that way, frame it that way, and then also at the end specify, Kenji's cool, he is fine, he is my friend. I'm not gonna speculate on why that's the case, but you would think that he might pick up on that particular dissonance in his video if he watched through it. But what do I know? Okay, so the second thing, he points the finger at VTube artists for this lack of representation. He says, VTube artists, why y'all so scared of melanin? Look, I'll be honest. Is it the case that maybe some artists might genuinely not want to draw black people? Yeah, sure. But to instantly jump to the conclusion that the reason for that must be racism is again really polarizing and doesn't do anything to help the situation of quote unquote not enough representation. So, there are many reasons why an artist might not be comfortable drawing a black VTuber model or black assets. I don't think, in particular with Shizzy's case, this is going to ring very hollow at the end of the stream. But for the sake of just extending an olive branch, we'll entertain this argument. In terms of the reasons why artists might not want to draw a black model, it does need to be said that, especially when the medium that artists are using to promote themselves and the medium that you are using to communicate with these artists is a shit platform like Twitter, the stakes are a lot higher for artists in terms of getting a model right or wrong when the model is black. Because you have bad actors like Shizzy who are willing to make this an issue about race and racism. When I said before about how different cultures might prioritize different values, what if, for example, an artist comes from a culture that prioritizes competence over diversity? If they don't feel like they can do a good job drawing something, they might just refuse it to avoid the trouble of failing. And again, if they were to fail, Twitter, as a platform, is built around the premise of taking personal disagreements, failures, anxieties, thoughts, opinions, whatever, and turning them into a public spectacle. So you can see why some artists may be hesitant to draw a black model or black assets for reasons aside from racism. And this gets into another large gripe with the way that Shizzy has framed this entire topic. Now, I'm going to be... Essentially, he had two choices when he went to promote this video, right? He could either go with the more accurate, there are racists among you, or he could phrase it in the more controversial and deliberately incendiary, y'all don't like black people. Now, again, I'm going to go out on a limb, assume the best intentions, and say that this is a solution to a problem that you actually want to have. And what I mean by that is the problem that this approach fixes is that nobody gives a shit about what genuine racists have to say. Now, on one hand, that's a good thing, because you don't want racists, genuine racists, getting influence over a space to be able to control it. On the other hand, that can also be a bad thing because, as a side effect, sometimes people can become apathetic to the effects of racism on the people on the receiving end. Now, I have no doubt that if Shizzy were to look in his chat, in his withheld messages, in his offline donations, he would find a whole host of people just calling him slurs, insulting him for his race, etc., etc. And he could have screenshotted all of them and included them in his video. But again, I don't think people would have cared about the video as much if he did that. Because, like I said, no one gives a shit about what genuine racists have to say. And let's be honest, once you get above a certain size in terms of audience, there is going to be at least one racist, at least one insane person, and in some cases, at least one serial killer in your audience. So this is kind of a non-statement. On the other hand, he could package it this way, and all of a sudden he has attention, controversy, etc., all to boost the reach of his video. And this is the approach that he's taken. But again, the problem is, if your concern is genuinely that there is racism or a lack of representation in a space, doing this does nothing to help the problem. In fact, it makes it worse, because the more you polarize an issue, the more you enforce a cone of silence around all possible discussion that can go towards that issue. If your issue is representation, if your issue is that you can't find if you can't find artists that are willing to make black VTuber models, black VTuber assets, a problem which I'm not sure if it's still as much of a thing in 2024, but if that is your problem, if you want more artists to be able to, like, get comfortable with the idea of making these models, painting these assets, if that is an issue that you care about, that issue can only be solved through, meaningful, constructive discussion and giving artists a safe space on a platform to experiment, fuck up, learn, whatever. And again, Twitter is not a platform that is designed to foster that kind of environment. I cannot stress enough how much the medium you use to communicate affects the way you communicate, affects the meaning of what gets said through that communication. Twitter is not a good medium. And if you are going to use Twitter to generate publicity, and unfortunately Twitter has kind of embedded itself as the way to generate publicity, which is shared by both artists and other kinds of creators, polarizing an issue like this further is only going to make the entire thing worse. Now, are you going to cover his fake apology video as well? No, I am not, because he's uploaded like 5 by now. I'm not going to waste my energy dissecting something that the creator himself is not even willing to defend. Lack of representation, I'm tired of hearing that. I can't believe you watched the whole 30-minute video. Yeah, look, it's that part of the reason why I'm doing this stream is because I don't recommend it. I'm not going to push a video to you guys when I don't even enjoy watching it myself. So I'm doing my best to engage with the points that he's made while also bypassing the horrid way in which he made them. This absolute abortion of a critique video. So again, just to really sum it up, right? A lack of representation does not automatically mean racism. Yes, some part of that lack of representation can be attributed to racism, right? I have no doubt that there are actual racists, both in artists, among audiences, and among creators. But to say that the lack of representation in the VTubing industry as a whole is only attributable to racism, or to even point out racism as a major reason, to immediately jump to that conclusion, is just harmful. And when it comes to the issue of promoting representation and condemning racism, one of the people that promoted this video initially was Evanito. And I bring this up not to shit on Evanito, but because ironically, Evanito himself had a video talking about a similar issue that is miles above what the fuck Shizzy did. He could have honestly just reposted this on Twitter while condemning what Shizzy said, and it would have been so much better in terms of just advancing this. Okay, so in this video, basically, Evanito talks about, among other things, his struggles of finding an artist that is both competent and willing to draw a black VTuber model for him to use. And he expresses that the whole the struggle of some people want to call out racism so much that all they see is racism. Yeah, that is definitely an issue, and it's only exacerbated by the seeing everything through the lens of American culture and struggles thing. So yeah, Evanito in his video, he talks about how difficult he found it to find an artist that was willing to make a black VTuber model for him. And again, the thing that I really want to emphasize is that the medium he has used to get his concerns across was not a call-out post. It was just a video where he expressed his personal thoughts and feelings about something. And that difference in medium makes a whole lot of difference in terms of how the way he talks about things comes across. This is a video that gives room for constructive discussion around an issue. And the way he talked about the issue of, in particular, he puts into words how frustrating it is to not have access to technology that can allow you to put your best foot forward content-wise, right? He wants to be able to express himself as a VTuber using a VTube model, which he's currently having trouble with getting because of how hard it is to find, or how hard it was at the time that this video was published, to find an artist that was willing to do it. And again, he doesn't instantly jump to the conclusion that, yes, this must be because of racism, like Shizzy does. And that makes all the difference in the way that he brings up this issue. Something else that he also mentions is the lack of representation. And again, he also is really measured in his take on why that representation might be the case. He does express that he wants to see more representation, but he doesn't blame that lack of representation on racism or even on the VTubing industry as a whole. At least that's not how I took the way that, he came across in this video. Now, in promoting this video to you guys, I do have to specify that there are some parts of this video that I personally disagree with. And again, part of the way that he structured his video is that we are able to have this personal disagreement without, resorting to name calling or anything like that. Oh, sorry, JV Robergato. The backlash has led Shizzy to call for a backup which threatens to interfere with business of one of the agency VTubers. Oh, believe me, we'll get to that in a second. So, yeah, back to the topic of this video. There is one of the main gripes that I personally have with this, and again, I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. He's literally just stating his personal thoughts and feelings, right? But I'm just saying that personally, I do find it to be concerning when someone just says, I would like to see more representation. And that is for a number of reasons. First, the way that statement is packaged makes it sound like neither a call to action nor a personal commitment. It just sounds like a request. And I am personally a big believer in the idea of becoming your own representation. And the reason for that is because genuine representation, the kind that acts as a proof of concept for your own dreams and aspirations, the kind that inspires you by not only, showing you that your goals can be achieved by someone like you, but by you, that kind of representation is not something you can get by just asking. And when you ask for that kind of representation, and this comes from me studying media, you need to be really careful of who is listening, or I should say, what is listening. Because when I see someone saying, I would like to see more representation, that to me is the equivalent of watching somebody thrash their legs in shark-infested waters. Because the people who are most likely to pick up on that message are going to be soulless corporations who will give you that representation, but only in a tokenized bastardization of genuine representation. And they will do so not because they care about diversity, not because they think that representation has any merits in and of itself, but because they are convinced it will make them more money. So, when you do say, I would like to see more representation, it is, in my eyes, just an invitation to these soulless corporations to come in and force feed that kind of tokenistic representation, because that is the only kind, the kind of representation that you can get by asking is only ever going to be the soulless kind, the kind that can be neatly packaged into a marketing brief to show to advertisers or a bunch of shareholders in a fucking meeting about how your company is doing. It's not the kind of representation that actually makes people want to do something with their life or want to pursue a goal that they've always been putting off because they didn't know if it could be achieved by someone like them. Again, I'm not saying that Evanito is wrong or anything. This is just a personal disagreement. And it's a personal disagreement that I really do think we are only able to have because the way that he packaged this video was, because he packaged the video in a way that wasn't a call out. Again, good video to watch. When it comes to this particular issue of racism and representation in the VTubing industry, I cannot overstate how much better this video is than Shizzy's when it comes to just opening up a discussion about that particular thing. Tinkerlin, representation has always felt weird to me. Representative how? Accurate to the global percentage, local percentage, some perceived subjective view of the world, or how it should be. Exactly. And again, people who weren't in my last stream, there's a term that I bring up called datafication, which is basically when you use numbers to quantify things that have no business being quantified. And again, like I said before, the kind of representation that will inspire people to pursue their goals, That kind of representation, that cannot be quantified, which is why the kind of representation that you often see talked about by corporations in the media, etc., that is the kind of representation that can be datafied. That is when they can look at, a bunch of employees, they can extract, what ethnicity they're from, what skin color they are, put them all into a neat percentage, and then show that to their shareholders, right? So again, that is the only kind of representation that, in my opinion, you can get by asking. To achieve genuine representation, I really do believe that you just have to be that yourself. And it's not easy. And I'm not saying that it's easy. Evanito has expressed that, becoming that representation is difficult because of the roadblocks he faced in getting the technology he needed to truly put his best foot forward. And I can understand that. But at the same time, it's harsh, but I don't think there is any other way of going about it. It is tough, but it is the only solution. Because asking for a solution, asking for more representation, will only attract the worst kind of people and or entities. The way I talk about corporations makes them sound like monsters, but to some extent, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they are.